still impressive, still had his chances, should arguably have won one of those games. He'll be feeling very confident. Two firebrands, they can create anything on the board. Very, very universal. Duda, he can do anything, cause chaos. I can't wait to see these games unfold.
What I love as well is that, look, I'm going to expose some weaknesses here, but I think it's only right that we do this before the match starts. Both players capable of double exclams all over the shop. Both players, we've seen examples of mistakes creeping in under time pressure and stuff like that. It's very difficult to predict as a result because we've seen both sides of both players during this very tournament.
Yeah, and that's why we love them. Crowd favorites, as you called them earlier, these types of players who go for it in every game, who don't have a reverse gear, who don't like to pull the brake. And we see the Catalan opening, Duda starting with the white pieces. This is something we caught a glimpse of, at least very similar position to the one between Hikaru Nakamura and Wei Yi earlier today. And in the meantime, Tanya, who do you think the outcome of this opening phase is going to suit?
Still early days, but one thing about Nodirbek that we do know is that he does enjoy those combative battles. Not that Duda shies away from them either, you know, like you said, firebrand of chess there. But these kind of slower battles, the Catalan, the choice that that Nodirbek has gone, that even Duda has gone for, does rely, yes, it's going to be a cagey approach, but again, if he strikes in the center with e4, he will get his type of position. I think with the white pieces, knowing Jan-Krzysztof Duda, he wants to maximize his chances in this one. There's no strat, I'm going to take this to the Armageddon, I want a slow game, I'm white, I'm going to push this out.
And with this kind of opening, it's very much okay, fine, we're going to be positioning things just a little bit, but don't mistake that for boring, don't mistake that for not doing very much. Think of it as packing more explosives into the position so that when that E4 fuse is lit, you get the fireworks thick and fast. That's what's happening here.
Yeah, watch out. Duda is ready to strike in the center, blow open those lines, those diagonals, and give himself some attacking chances. It's not easy to prevent that move, so maybe trying to create his own play. There we go, Nodirbek. He threatens to win a pawn. Queen's Gambit style if he does grab on c4 on the next move. Given an exclamation mark, maybe the only way to counter Duda's idea.
And a very active one, right? A counter offense on that c4 pawn, sort of forcing a decision by Duda. Does he go passive with his knight, or will he find other ways to play for the initiative? If I have to make a bet, you know, for Jan-Krzysztof Duda, he's a player who doesn't go on the defense. He's going to try to even sacrifice that pawn to get the e-pawn rolling up the board and try and play for counterplay. Very often in the Catalan, black wins a pawn and white wins the center.
It's such a dangerous state of mind, and I agree. Like, I don't think these players necessarily, well, they certainly know, but they don't like anything else. We have two players who love those forward, aggressive, dynamic positions, who really dislike having to take a step back and defend and bide your time, especially once an attack is ongoing. So you are going to see some form of mistake, but counter mistake, counter punching. We could see lots of swings in the evaluation. This is not just about building up a small bit of momentum and keeping going, because I feel like it could swing way more than we would expect.
Definitely. Both players have such high ceilings on their day. In form, they can beat anyone. I've never really seen Duda retreat a piece either, so no surprise that he goes forward with this move, keeping the option open of blowing the center with e4 for a bit later, offering a knight trade. And this game about to come to life.
So David, you've just contractually promised everyone watching the stream that we're not going to see a knight retreat onto the back rank in this match from either player.
Unless it's strictly forced.
Unless it's strictly forced, okay. All right, because we have seen that quite a few times today, but it is rather unlikely here.
Especially not from Duda.
Yeah.
But it just happened from Nodirbek, so I'm glad that you took that time out and said, well, unless it's forced, so there was a rider on that one.
Back rank, we're okay.
But for Duda, the dude, as he's called in the chess world, it's always and very often the forward moves that come into play. Now, again, you know, the knight's moved back. It's eyeing that e5 pawn, but some big decisions to be made because there's still tension on the c4 pawn as well.
Right.
The point here is Duda going to simplify in the center, take on d5, and push e4? Because that has to be where the counter lies. That's got to be how you open up the Catalan bishop for yourself.
Yeah, Black's triangle formation here, the d5, e6, c6 formation just too strong, blunting the effect of all of White's pieces, especially the light squared bishop. As Tanya points out, also the d file wants to open, but no, he just slides his queen there from Duda. A bit of a mysterious move. I guess for now, Black doesn't have any immediate threats, but Whether the white queen is actually better placed on this square as opposed to where she previously stood, that is debatable. Duda, it's not a retreating move, just a sidestep, but I'm still surprised.
Exactly. It's not about the pawn takes pawn because there's a c6 pawn that's hanging with the bishop on g2. That's not the threat. But the big question, why the b2 square? The queen on c2, and I think this answers it. You know, he was preempting, Nodirbek was, that the rook was about to slide over to the same line as the queen and just sort of sidestepping any potential pins if you were to grab on d5.
Yep, and Duda continues improving his pieces, bringing the rook to c1 this time. And yeah, very hard to know how to break the status quo here. It does feel like he's just waiting with his pieces, Duda, for the position to come to life. White's piece is very active for now.
So here's a potentially anti-positional question, so bear with me here. If we don't see the central pawn break at some point soon, are we going to get a g5 from black? Are we going to get an h4 from white? Like, to what extent can fireworks on the side of the board be concurrent with what's happening with the tension build up in the middle?
Yeah, it's actually very interesting that you mentioned that g5 for black is a very direct attempt to win a pawn. And maybe we can show what would happen if he does decide to pull the trigger here. Nodirbek Abdusattorov, it's his type of move. It's very ambitious. He likes to go forward. But it does come with some risk attached. And we see on the green board, if g5 is played, the white bishop is forced to retreat. Let's say it goes back to e3. If black now grabs the knight on e5, we have stumbled across the reason the white queen is on b2. We would see a trade of pawns in the center and the white knight jump forward. The white queen now hitting the black knight. So when the dust settles, black's king is open, it's level material, the d-pawn weak, and this only favors Duda. So this not yet happening. We finally figured out why the white queen is on b2, why the black queen has gone to e8. That is the next question. Maybe just getting out the eye line of the white rooks. Here we go. Trades do happen. e4 on the board, finally.
Finally, just getting that bishop active. Also, the rook on d1, and when it happens, there's a question mark. This is why I absolutely hate the computers. You know, the most human-looking move, the most natural move in the position. And look at that. It's an inaccuracy.
It looks like, I mean, that's what makes chess so beautiful, right? For example, we've just basically explained, oh yeah, that queen across the b2, yeah, basically it counters g5. You're watching at home going, hang on a second, what's going on here? And we got the analysis board out, and it is so beautiful the way things can be strung together.
Exactly, and these top grandmasters, they always see 3, 4, 5 moves ahead in these forcing variations. In the meantime, black threw away a pawn. Black pushed a pawn to d4 where it could be captured. Ooh. Now g5 does land with a question mark. Maybe it was stronger to wait with this move, keep it up your sleeve for later. Maybe improve the black dark square bishop first, but this is still very typical play. And look at this, counterattacking, ignoring the white bishop, hitting the black knight instead with the white rook and queen.
Hey, two players who don't have a reverse gear. This kind of makes sense. I mean, I get that this is a blunder, but this is very in keeping with what we know about their playing styles, right? So a part of me isn't surprised to see them fighting tooth and nail like this.
Yeah, this is a crazy critical moment for Nodirbek. There's one way to take advantage, to the maximum at least, of what has just happened. Duda sliding his queen across, given double question mark. If you take the white bishop now, we could see a trade, and the black knight falling to the white rook. Now the key move is pawn to f3, throwing another pawn off the board just to open up a diagonal. If this pawn is captured, bishop takes pawn, the black bishop slides across. Look at this.
Oh,
skewer.
wow.
This is beautiful. Not easy. This is a hidden resource for Nodirbek right now.
And the tough part is seeing that move f3 from this point. You know, pawn takes bishop. Will he take advantage of that? And Duda, he misses it, but as does Nodirbek Abdusattorov. He doesn't go with pawn takes bishop. Instead, a defensive move, protecting the knight on d7.
And now the natural move, bishop e3, looks even more tempting because as soon as the rook moves out of the way, the pawn on b6 is naturally under attack. There's will he play it? Are we going to leave the bishop on pre's? Surely he must retreat it now.
We might see the first retreating move by Jan-Krzysztof Duda in this one, and leaving that pawn on e5 hanging as well. Knight takes pawn in the air. That would at least get the pawn back for black, and perhaps with some strategic advantages here. You know, the knight looking beautiful, the bishop coming to c5. If you push the f-pawn, attacking the knight can jump further into the game. Knight g4, hitting that bishop on e3. There are so many weaknesses on the dark squares.
Yep, that white rook in the center as well on d4 was almost trapped. There were ideas to hit it, to trap it. Instead, the white knight leaps to the side of the board, offering a rook trade. does feel like the Black Knight is superior, though. And the eval bar does say that Black holds an advantage. So despite the missed opportunity we saw earlier, winning material on the spot, he's still got a small strategic advantage here, Nodirbek. But on the clock, slightly behind. He's offering a queen trade now. If the queens do disappear, the Black rook is poised, ready to jump in. It's not Duda's style either to trade queens, so I'm skeptical whether we'll see that move.
You know, the fascinating thing about the tactical miss that happened by Nodirbek, we would have given him close to a winning advantage had he won that exchange by accepting the bishop on f4, finding that f3 resource, is that if anyone pats you on the shoulder and says that there's something in this position, like the evaluation bar guides us as commentators, these people find it in less than 1 second.
By the time you tap them on the shoulder, they've already seen it 4 moves deep.
Exactly, but they have no idea that this is where a resource lies. You know, they don't have access to the information that we do.
Right.
So for them to kind of come to this conclusion that there's something in this position is incredibly hard, especially when you're also trying to manage your clock.
That's a great point. Like when you're, so imagine like an improving chess player or you're playing a club game, it's very easy to go back over your game afterwards. I can still hear my coach's voice ringing in my head going, that was a critical position and you didn't spend enough time looking for the right move. That's all well and good, but I didn't even know it was a critical position. It felt like it should have been straightforward. It felt like the choices were critical. Knowing that you need to spend more time in a particular position is such a difficult skill to learn in chess. I'm not sure how I can describe it. It is intuitive and it comes with experience, but it's almost as difficult as calculating itself.
Exactly. It takes some introspection. It takes some real self-control. It normally is triggered by forcing moves, these critical moments, checks, captures, and threats. Earlier, that missed opportunity was a series of captures, then threats, and winning material at the end for Black. But here we go. The game's still very lively. The White Knight not quite trapped. It was able to use a square to escape, and we're going to see some flashy tactics across threat here. The Black Queen could drop, but then the White Queen will drop. Exclamation point given to this last move by Nodirbek, but we could see the position start to liquidate. Everything traded off. Queens are disappearing, and we'll see a bishop endgame.
It's fizzling out. The queens come off the board. There's one slight edge that I will give to Jan-Krzysztof Duda. At the end of these of this trade sequence that we're seeing, the white bishop could potentially fall back next to the king, eyeing that b5 pawn, which is in fact pinned to the bishop on a6, threatening the move a4. Well, he instead goes with another idea, and I think Duda realizes it. That did he have a sliver of opportunity there with bishop f1?
I have a feeling that was a mouse slip. He wants to play bishop to f1. I think he played king to e1 accidentally. There's no... maybe not. I was going to I don't know. I was going to say there's no logical reason to move your king there. Maybe bringing it towards the queen side makes some sense, but big missed opportunity potentially. As we see, maybe this was the response anyway, the black bishop hitting the e4 pawn, and still ultimately a level endgame. Neither side can really get to the opponent's weaknesses, but yeah, dropping the bishop back looked like the way to play for a win, and that is Duda's style. We saw the shake of the head. Okay, I'm still going to stick with it. Mouse slip.
I'm with you. +1 on that. I think for Jan-Krzysztof Duda, especially knowing his brand, his style of chess, he will try to maximize even the tiniest opportunities. And it would be, the ball would be in Nodirbek's court to find the resource of coming back, and the game would go on. There would be an asymmetry in the pawn formation in that endgame. Now, this is completely balanced.
Now, look, we have seen our fair share of rook endgames in the Esports World Cup so far. I think this is the first time we've seen a 4 bishops endgame. So talk to me about this. Is it the sort of endgame where no matter what anyone does, as long as there isn't a blunder, it's actually fairly straightforward to draw? Or is it the kind of thing where actually it's really sharp, it's really, you have to be extremely careful, it's way more dangerous than you think, it looks benign, but it's not. Where does this sit?
Yeah, I would say not fully benign. You still need to kind of be on your toes, protect all your weaknesses, make sure the opponent's kings can't enter. The bishops tend to cancel each other out. They can block each other's diagonals, but it's all about the king activity. That's why the white king is positioned centrally, ready to go right, ready to go left, depending on opportunity. The black king is kind of sitting nearby, ready to control some squares too. And yeah, these endgames are quite rare. And there we go. It's actually a draw by agreement.
There we go. And 3 minutes plays 3 minutes and 6 seconds. I think both players here thinking, yeah, okay, we can try and squeeze out 5-10 seconds on the clock here and there. But like you say, if the kings aren't doing anything particularly active that allows the game to get particularly imbalanced, this is probably a fair result. And that means now that Nodirbek has an opportunity with white.
That's going to be a fun one. You know, how much will he push? Yes, the result was peaceful, but the game itself had quite a flurry of flashy trades occur in the middle, which kept us entertained. And perhaps a tiny missed opportunity in the end there by Jan-Krzysztof Duda. I think when you see this pawn formation, you know, the balanced material on the board, both kings active, draw is a respectable result. Both players not too unhappy with it.
Yeah, ultimately they both played very well. Yes, there was one small tactic maybe missed by both players earlier, but after that it looked like a very logical game, and yeah, these two very equally balanced on paper.
So thinking about the games that we've seen earlier, especially Nodirbek, because we've seen more of him, of course, on the A stream.
You know what he's thinking right now?
Which version of him is here, Tanya? What's he thinking? And did we get Nodirbek game 1 or Nodirbek game 2? Like, tell me which version of him you see right now.
It's only my guess, but I think that look that he has right now, he starts with the white pieces. He's trying to understand and think what is going to be his opening approach. Where is it that he can catch Duda, or at least force him to burn the clock as quickly as possible?
Yeah, he really does like to counterattack Nodirbek. In the earlier game, the first game against Fabiano with black, he got given a chance from the opening, never let it go. And in the Armageddon, he was actually on the back foot, facing some blows early on, but as soon as he won a pawn, he was the one to go for it.
One more fun question diving back into history. Obviously, Caruana Duda was played yesterday. What can Nodirbek have gleaned from those games?
Yeah, ultimately that Duda does play a bit fast and loose sometimes in these critical positions. That one, it felt like Duda did not want to take too much risk. It felt like he did learn from yesterday. Duda was very lucky against Caruana, we should mention.
Yeah.
He was dead lost in the decisive game. 2-3 moves later, he won it from a one-move blunder against Fabi. So Nodirbek, he will know that yeah, he will get his chances most likely at some point.
Well, we'll find out if the takeaways for Duda worked or not. But whatever he took away about Fabi from that match, it definitely worked. You know, he was able to play his own, take down one of the big bosses, one of the titans. And again, both these players, you beat Fabiano Caruana, you earned respect.
Yes, absolutely. Early bishop b5 here in a Sicilian, which I'm quite happy because it's actually in my repertoire. So I'm very excited when I get to see some of these ideas and incorporate them into my own play. But this, of course, is the game where Nodirbek, playing with the white pieces, is trying to squeeze out a decisive advantage to avoid having to go to Armageddon. He's had a very long day already, let's not forget, and he wants to find a way to finish this match right here, right now.
Yeah, it feels fitting, Armageddon, somehow, that it ends today. We've seen so many across the groups. But ultimately, this position, this Sicilian, isn't as lively as some. Normally when players, especially with the black pieces, the likes of Duda, play the Sicilian, they're hoping for a chance to counterattack, for some really messy middle games, mutual attacking. This one, it's a Maroczy bind as well. White c4 and e4 pawns control a lot of squares, and it's going to be hard to break through. Here we see Duda trying to muddy the waters by bringing his knight back to the center, and Nodirbek just trying to keep control.
So far, very controlled play by both players. You know, no big weaknesses on the board, no isolated pawns so far. We might see some trades happen. The players might wait for that, get the rooks onto the central lines. You can play fast these improving moves. And the one thing that perhaps gives Nodirbek a slight edge is that that knight on d5, once it gets there, it starts sort of putting a little bit of a clamp down on black's position, you know. You're taking away squares. The only way to push it out would be e6, and that would further create weaknesses.
Exactly. The long-term weakness here is probably the d6 pawn. You don't really want to, as black, move the e-pawn forward while d6 is a target, but you can see there's a queen and a rook. White already lining up his pieces to focus on that long-term weakness.
You know, there's this evaluation in chess where we say it's equal, but slightly more equal for white than black.
Wow, and a lashing out of the structure here by Duda. He's got the queens off the board. I said earlier that he hates queen trades, commentator's curse, in the previous game. Here we see a similar structure to the one that Nodirbek enjoyed against Fabiano Caruana, where it is one side having two central pawns, but they are stared at on open lines. This time with the queens off the board, no bishop pair advantage, but still, I do like Nodirbek's chances.
Looking good, especially once that knight arrives. And Jan-Krzysztof Duda, with that trade, with the rook on f5, you know, there's one very thematic break for black. Two, actually, in these Sicilians. d5 and b5. d5, that's off the cards. I wonder if this is a moment that you can actually get the b5 break in. The c4 pawn tied down to defending that central knight does not allow the capture. Pawn takes pawn. And I think that's exactly what Jan-Krzysztof Duda has in mind right now as he goes into the tank.
Critical moment. Pawn breaks often require a lot of thought, whether you want to change the structure, whether it suits you, whether it's the perfect moment. And we see him instead get those itchy fingers, play a move we warned against, kicking away the white knight from the center, but loosening the black pawns in the process. Very committal decision there by Duda.
Long-term committal, right? Because that d6 pawn that we were highlighting is going to be a weakness for the rest of the game. So unless he's got something concrete, a follow-up, this is not a move that you want to make.
Trying to work out what the follow-up is there. That's very, very interesting indeed. So say the knight goes back, I guess, to c3 or e3. They both seem relatively logical here. e3 invites the trade of the knight, and then once the bishop's there, oh, you've got the d6 pawn under attack and the a7 pawn under attack. So there's some questions there. On the other hand, bringing the knight back to c3 means you can reroute it to b5, and you're asking black the question, do you want to play some more committal pawn moves? Because if you play a6, I might go knight a4 into b6 at some point, for example.
Yeah, it's a dilemma. It's a nice one to have. Both moves look relatively healthy, harmonious there for white. Duda, maybe his intention will be to push forward in the center. We see the knight trade, and there we go. The backward d-pawn does find a way to step forward, inviting more exchanges. Black will be left with an isolated pawn either way, but as long as it's well defended, it shouldn't be too bad. It's only one weakness, shouldn't be enough for white to probe at here.
Another question is, do you want a pair of rooks off the board before giving up that isolated queen's pawn, or do you immediately take pawn takes pawn? The rook on f5, he does go for the pawn recapture. The rook on f5 doesn't look very stable. You know, it can be hit. There is a target that Nodirbek has. Again, an equal balanced position, which is slightly more equal for Nodirbek. He's the one who's enjoying this.
Yes, indeed. I'm thinking now, I guess you don't necessarily want to invite the liquidation by trying to blockade the pawn. You don't want to play the knight into d4 maybe just yet, because I'm wondering out loud if there's quite a lot of exchanges that'll happen on d4. At the end of it, what I'm actually scared of, and the one thing I'm looking at on the board, can the rook come into c2?
When did you turn into Hikaru Nakamura?
Oh, you see, I didn't draw any arrows. That's the difference. Yeah, so my elo will gain about 1,000 as soon as I learn how to draw about 16 arrows while talking. That's going to be my peak rating right there.
Just this once, I'll draw a lot of arrows, and it was all about the d4 square.
There you go. Thank you, David. I appreciate it.
But ultimately, he doesn't go for it yet. Maybe soon. But for now, he gives the white king some breathing space. And very difficult to know how to improve the position for Duda, as he cannot advance his central pawn forward.
The frustrating thing about this, or one of the frustrating things for white, I'm naturally looking at ways to try and get rid of the isolated pawn on the d file. So to do that, you want to stack your rooks. You want to bring your rook on f1 into the game. The problem is you play the rook to d2 and you potentially invite the bishop to come in and harass you on c3. You bring the rook up to d3, you potentially invite knight b4 harassing you as well. And it doesn't feel like there's an easy, harmonious way for white to be able to coordinate his pieces.
That's very true. Those are very important details. Otherwise, white's plan would be very straightforward. That's perhaps why Nodirbek decided not to commit anything too drastically on this last go, as Duda starts to think. It's a bit of a long think for him. I'm going to stick my neck out here, Tanya, and say that neither player, their style is really suited to this position.
No, they want the fireworks. They want the queens on the board. They want those opposite flank attacks going. This is an endgame. It's a long grind where, yes, black has the isolated pawn at the center of the board, but his own ideas, the activity, the piece activity that you were earlier alluding to, also always in the air is a move like a5, threatening a4 to destroy the pawn formation on that left flank. The rook from c8, once the knight's out of the way, can come to c2, just giving black enough to fight for counterplay here.
The white rook improves itself very, very slightly here, throwing the ball back to Duda's court. I like the fact, from Nodirbek's perspective, that he played that quite quickly. He played it after just 9 seconds. And Duda, who spent over 1.5 minutes on his last move, needs to think again. The clock is ticking. Doesn't seem like much right now, just a 1 minute 20 disadvantage. But that deficit, if it grows, could come back to haunt him with black.
And he goes for it immediately. The idea of creating weaknesses, like you said, clock deficit, play on that. So for Nodirbek, he needs to respond quickly, but it's not an easy move to answer. Well, he does. He takes the bait. Black rook gets active, attacking the a4 pawn, which isn't defendable.
No way to hold it. The black rooks are getting active, but the white rooks also have some open lines to stare down at. The black b pawn potentially quite weak. White's most obvious move, I would say, is to slide across and go for this one. At least you get your rook in and behind, and the black king slightly more open than its counterpart.
But still, that troublesome d pawn remains, and while the position's opened up and the b7 pawn is looking potentially weak for black, ultimately, on the queen side, White's going to be losing that pawn on a4. White is going to struggle a little bit with defending the pawn on a2, and instead of figuring out ways to cause problems for black, it's actually black causing problems for white. So from an initiative point of view, it feels a little bit like psychological advantage Duda.
I agree, and you could see Nodirbek get a little shifty as well after that pawn sacrifice. David, your idea, great call there, rook b1, going for the counter-attack. And now there are so many tempting options if you're Jan-Krzysztof Duda, right? But one thing, don't take too much time. You could go on the defense of the b7 pawn. For me, the most attractive, push the d pawn. Now that one of the defenders out of the way, d4 becomes possible. You try to activate, create more threats by creating that weakness into an asset, a passed pawn in this position. Or John's idea, simply grab an a4. Duda goes for the most aggressive approach.
He's trying to mix and match. He's going for all the ice cream flavors here. Pushed his pawn, defended b7. Next, he's going to try and grab this lonely pawn on the side. And okay, he's saying now, Nodirbek, you can take it, but it will come at the cost of a potential knight for bishop trade.
As Hikaru would say, Duda is trying to have his cake and eat it too.
Exactly. And hungry times here for that black knight.
Yeah, and absolutely how many seconds did he think there? Just a couple, and he's very happy to take on a5 because the pawn on a2 potentially drops afterwards as well. I'm not 100% sure about this. I'm wondering, what is the thought going into the endgame? Because those pawns for black on b and d are isolated. The pawn on a2 for white is weak. Maybe this is playing a bit more into their styles, because the one word I'm thinking about to describe it is kind of messy, if I'm honest.
Yeah, messy. It just depends right now how clean he wants to make it. Nodirbek, he feels like he's about to pull the brakes. This check is going to be blocked by the black rook or the black bishop. We could see a scenario where all the pawns just start to disappear.
Right.
The white knight now can capture on d4. Yes, the black rook will take on a2, but things are starting to clarify. That mess you were mentioning, I think it was just uncomfortable for Nodirbek, so he's trying to make things as straightforward as possible. From that moment, the white knight could even jump forward into e6. We could see trades, and at the very end, all of the pawns start to disappear. The black b pawn is going to be hard to protect.
Now, there are still fun shenanigans. This is usually the time in the game where we say, but one player's got a 2-minute advantage over the other, and if we just grind this down, a critical mistake is possible. They've matched each other for time pretty much move for move in this game, and we're not seeing an obvious difference between them.
Not on the strength on the board, not on the clock so far. And a rook trade being offered. I'm glad you didn't take the bet on retreating moves. Knight f3 did happen eventually, trying to defend against that f2 pawn, which was pretty soft there. And here we see Jan-Krzysztof Duda, he's even offering a pawn, it looks like. Rook takes rook, bishop takes rook, rook takes pawn. Why are you giving a free pawn? It comes with tactics, as it usually does when it's Jan-Krzysztof Duda. That bishop would have come to c5, a tender spot on f2, and which was, again, a weakness you couldn't control. So Nodirbek decides to keep the rooks on the board, attacks b7, and the bishop on f8, still pinned.
Yep, some deep calculation. And this last move shows that Nodirbek is the one trying to win. Duda was offering a draw, essentially, if the rooks had disappeared, if pawns had also been liquidated. But suddenly, given the fact that Nodirbek declined that rook trade, the two black rooks on the second rank look mightily strong.
But this is sort of passive-aggressive, right? One aggressive move, and then you go rook to f1, you defend f2. The knight went forward to d4, and then back on the next move.
My favorite style of behavior, as well as my favorite style of chess, passive-aggressive.
It absolutely is here. The rook just shuffling across to b2 here, basically because you want to move the black king out of the way so that you can play bishop c5 to further bolster this attack, but you don't want the rook taking on b7 to come with check. That extra tempo would be incredibly frustrating. So that's why you saw rook b2 first, but still looking very equal here.
Normally you would say that the bishop with pawns on both sides of the board is the preferable minor piece. The white knight struggling here to really get in the action. Another knight retreat, he went back, he went forward, but it's all about the rook activity and the fact that the black bishop is currently tied down, but no longer. It gets into the action.
This is getting scary for Nodirbek Abdusattorov. You know, he should have pulled the brakes when he had the opportunity. Now one pair of rooks goes off the board, but the B pawn is still alive. That's a passer. That goes up the board. Time goes down, and you're suddenly panicking. You know, it's not over, this one.
When things clarify, even if the position is objectively, like dynamically equal, I see a plan for black, because I see a pass pawn that I just need to keep pushing. I need to keep generating opportunities to push. I'm looking for the plan for white now, you know what I mean? So suddenly, in terms of time usage, in terms of clarity of plan, I feel like Duda has a better idea of where things are going.
Exactly, and it's a matter of time before he starts pushing that pawn. The only reason the black B pawn hasn't pushed so far is that the white rook might be able to give some checks from the side. Duda, meanwhile, recruiting his own rook. I'm going to say it's still a 3-result game, depending on how much risk both sides want to take, how the race turns out when black starts pushing. But for now, a threat on the white pawn.
Draw the most objective result here. You know, but Duda's got chances because he's got the B pawn, and it is a draw. That was quick.
The most objective result, the fastest caster curse we've had in this tournament so far. Tanya, you absolutely called it. The players happy then to move forward and go to Armageddon. Now, I have to say, this match so far, surprisingly peaceful. We've been throwing words around like firebrand, like the best defense is a good offense. We've been putting a lot of hype into how unbelievably aggressive both of these players are, and they can be. But so far, you know what? A little bit reserved, maybe keeping something in the tank.
Yeah, some very clear risk aversion from both players. Uncharacteristic in that regard. Making us feel foolish, of course, but Armageddon does promise a decision, a winner ultimately, and those two games, very balanced, very high quality, very high percentage accuracy, 98% for both, and a draw, a fair result. Although both players rushing to Armageddon, one of them will live to regret that decision.
So, risk averse so far in the first two games. Who's going to take the bigger risk and have the black pieces but with draw odds in the Armageddon game? We'll be right back with that game set to begin. Don't go anywhere.
When the world of business is constantly changing, you need to stay ahead. So what about AI to generate new possibilities? Machine learning to predict what customers will like. Or expand your business by forecasting delivery routes with real-time data. With the power of the cloud, imagine how AWS can transform your business.
Welcome to the most exciting format in chess, Armageddon, the ultimate tiebreaker. Armageddon grants white more time on the clock, but in return, white must win. A draw secures black the match point. White will start with 10 minutes. Each player submits a confidential bid with the amount of time that they are willing to play with to take black and get those coveted draw odds. The lowest bid gets to play black and plays with the amount of time that they bid. The opponent gets the full 10 minutes. Let the Armageddon commence.
One more time before we close out day 2 of chess at the Esports World Cup. It is Armageddon. Duda versus Abdusattorov. Twisted Minds versus Navi. And one game to decide who will move on to the quarterfinals and who will get his key crushed on this stage straight after the game. The stage is set. We're getting ready for the match now. What do we think these players will have bid? Do we still think 6 minutes is a bit too much? They were using time pretty much equally in the first 2 games, so I feel like maybe risk averse is the way to go.
How low can you go? That's the big question to get the black pieces. I say nothing below 7 minutes should be legal.
Yeah, Group D, the group of death, we've been calling it. It will be the death of someone's chances here in Riyadh. But ultimately, there have been no clues as to who the better, more informed player is today. They've just been equally impressive.
Well, we're going to be tipping the scales slightly in just a moment because one of these players is going to get draw odds. A draw would be the equivalent of a win for them, and we can now reveal that the bids, again, extremely close, not quite 4 seconds, but very close. It is Duda who will be playing with 7 minutes and 18 seconds on the clock. So he will be playing with the black pieces, but critically, if the game is a draw, Duda will advance. Nodirbek Abdusattorov bid 7 minutes 25 seconds, just 7 seconds more, but it was enough to lose the bid. So he'll start with the white pieces and have 10 minutes, but it's a must-win situation.
And guess what? He's been there before. This is his second Armageddon of the day.
Yep.
This is the second time he starts with the white pieces, and
Absolutely.
we all know how the first one went, taking down a Fabiano Caruana. Can Nodirbek do it again? These are the 2 giant slayers. Both have defeated Fabi to get to where they are right now.
Yeah, if he stuck to his bid from earlier against Fabiano Caruana, Nodirbek just went a few seconds lower, he would have won this bid. He would have got the black pieces. 7 minutes plus is the sweet spot, but that experience earlier today of an Armageddon, especially with the white pieces, must win. He was successful. You would think that that tips it slightly in Nodirbek's favor. But here we go. We're off. It's the 4 knights defense again. And look at this. Early decision, early sacrifice for black and a mouse slip.
No!
Oh my gosh. He had to push that pawn 1 step forward. Is he going to resign? Jan-Krzysztof Duda with a mouse slip. He has eliminated. Unbelievable.
For the first time, a mouse slip instantly decides the outcome of a game at the Esports World Cup. This is an occupational hazard for esports all over the world, but this is the first time we've seen it in such a crunch situation in the Armageddon game. This nobody was expecting.
Wow, this is a normal opening trap. Black temporarily sacrifices a piece only to push a pawn with a fork and win it back on the next move. Quick action replay here. Knight takes pawn is a sacrifice. Knight takes e4, recaptured. Pawn to d5, wins back the material with a level position. Pawn to d6, he's just a piece down. He gives up though. Incredible drama.
This is absolute heartbreak to see Jan-Krzysztof Duda after the fights that he's had here in Riyadh to go out like this. But you know what? Mouse skills. That is all part of the battle here at the Esports World Cup. Nodirbek Abdusattorov, what a gift this has been.
That is unbelievable. And the pressure, look, the pressure gets to everyone. In high pressure situations, in all sorts of esports, you get mouse slips, you get someone clicking before they should, maybe peeking a corner that they shouldn't have, a little bit too early. This is the equivalent in chess. People saying there might be comparisons with that. This is exactly the sort of situation you need to avoid.
Yeah, I've never seen this before in my career. I'm surprised he even resigned. There was a chance that Nodirbek would have let him off there and given him a